strong and a very appropriate parallel between the mystic death cult of statism and addiction. School might just be a symptom of a larger corruption, but in addiction and any kind of, codependence or drug addiction, alcoholism, one of the most destructive symptoms is, for lack of a better description, this little voice in a person's head that keeps telling them that they don't have a problem. And this is a powerful new tool of subversion, because now we have a scientific human being management and herding system disguised as a public service. And that allows its longevity to exceed prior systems of control, obviously, because we still have it today. So that being said, I think it's important to look at Prussia in the context of its time. Why is there suddenly this need for a control system that is marked by subtlety and gradualism when overt brute force has worked in the world for so long, for thousands of years? What necessitates this change? What is going on in the world? What ideas have power in the world when the school system is set up? Well, at that point, we're a couple decades beyond major revolutions in France and the United States. Both of them appear to be popular uprisings based on the concept of human freedom. Obviously, in France, it didn't hold because by the time the schools are set up, Napoleon is in power. In fact, that's one of the reasons for setting the schools up, to inculcate military obedience. And in the United States, you could argue that it didn't hold either. And why didn't they hold? These organic, grassroots, popular uprisings in the name of freedom? Well, one of the reasons is because they were not organic, grassroots, popular uprisings. It was the rhetoric of the Age of Reason, freedom, the Enlightenment being used to motivate people to fight for agendas that had really nothing to do with them. The same tricks that are used today to motivate people to fight for the agenda of elites were used in revolutionary America. This is for freedom, this is for democracy, liberty, justice, all that. And eventually, because that kind of message is so attractive, the revolution does gain popular support. It is a gradual process. It doesn't happen with shots being fired at Lexington and Concord. That was something that was built up. When people in the colonies, or now in the United States after the revolution, want to continue the revolutionary spirit, they quickly find themselves being beaten down by Washington's army. And it's the same thing as today. Like, while America, the government claims to be, fighting these wars for freedom and democracy and liberation, what's going on at home as people actually try to practice those things? I don't think that requires any elaboration. So the revolutions are not popular uprisings. That's important. But the point is that they have got people talking and thinking about freedom. So this is the impact on a world that has been completely irrational for almost really 2,000 years, even at this point, of the Enlightenment, the Age of Reason, and the revolutionary spirit that is alive, still alive, even though it's slowly being crushed by Napoleon and the American government in France and the United States. So this is a very clear message to the rulers in Europe and elsewhere that there are some lessons of history that need to be learned and applied. And it is understood at this time by those in power, going back to the mindset of those in power, that the greatest threat to old world control systems, including religion, is the Enlightenment. Now, the war, the ongoing war, which has been very out in the open for a long time, that war being fought by those in power against the masses for the sole purpose of maintaining or increasing that power, must continue. But now it needs to be fought by other means. We've already seen hints of this at the beginning of the 19th century with the establishment of the school system in Prussia, but it will continue. And like I said, it will continue right up to the present day. So now let's start looking at some of the other tactics that are going to be utilized in this war. The first one, in the interview, you heard me mention this question, why does a farmer not contemplate whether or not a cow is supposed to be more than a pile of meat? Well, when it comes to human farming, this was a consideration, and it was not what's good for the humans. It was how can the humans' output be maximized for the benefit of the rulers. Stefan Molyneux has talked about this in his videos using chickens as an example. But a chicken in a cage, that's very efficient. It's a very totalitarian management system for that little chicken, but the chicken will still produce eggs. However, if the chicken is put into a free-range environment, its productive output will increase for the benefit of the farmer. So we see the illusion of freedom. They have to kind of run with this idea of the Enlightenment, of the Age of Reason. When it comes to human freedom, it has to be, to some extent, embraced and offered at the very least as an illusion. This illusion will never be applied to the school system, however. Too dangerous in those formative years. But when you consider that experience of schooling, whether we're talking about the 19th century in Germany or the 20th, right into the 21st century in the United States, if you think about that experience, there is not much that could follow that would not look like freedom. So that illusion of freedom really only has to be paper thin. And of course, the schools are essential in the illusion of freedom, because you can't have people running around thinking that they're free if you don't have very careful control over how they think. And that thinking has to be kept within certain confines. Maybe we could describe it as free-range thinking. You get a little room to move around, but you're still in a pen and you're still on a farm. And the schools also have another function within this larger picture of subversion of a potentially rational, potentially free world that might one day, if unmolested, emerge out of the Age of Reason. So remember here, we're talking about a war. And one of the goals in war is efficiency. And one of the ways to maximize fighting efficiency is to increase the power disparity in your favor between you and your enemy. I mentioned earlier in this show that the greatest power disparity in human relationships is parent-child. One of the functions of the school is to usurp the parent, to put the state into the role of parent, to split up families, to take children away from these other influences at a very formative time in their lives. But you can't just, it can't be that simple. You can't just say, well, I'm in charge of this whole thing, so you need to value me. You need to be loyal to me more than you would be to your own family, to your own parents. That doesn't work. So this mythology also has to come into the picture, and that is nationalism, right? You need to give people this synthetic pride, this sense of belonging, considering the experiences in the schools and the way most families have worked. This idea of nationalism makes perfect sense. Here is a promise of community and a sense of belonging in exchange for conformity and obedience. But turning the state into a parent also has another effect. The third thing, in addition to the illusion of freedom and the splitting up of families, we also see, well, if the state is the parent, the dependence upon the state increases throughout the entire 1800s. By the end of the 19th century, Germany is incredibly socialist. This goes beyond just the schools. Oh, now wait a minute. Socialism, that's a new word in this show, at least. What is it? Where does it come from? What does it mean? Well, let's start with the etymology. The term socialism is meant as a contrast to the idea of individualism. It grows out of the thinking and the research of a man who was, surprise, educated in German schools and later went on to the University of Berlin. His name is Karl Marx. His thinking is further influenced by the time and experience in a little club for young people where they study the thinking of, surprise, Georg Hegel. The club is called the Young Hegelians. Punch and pie are served. Marx is critical of Hegel in many respects, especially in the area of metaphysics, but he embraces the dialectic. In fact, it provides an important foundation for Marxist theory. Marxist theory, and I don't think I need to get into incredible detail about this here, I think this would be review, provides the ultimate justification for the expansion of the state behind the facade of the noble cause. Marx claims that the world is controlled by a very small group of people for their own benefit. This is an astute observation. He then blames this system of control on what he calls capitalism, which is now, always, but hopefully not forever, a theoretical concept based on applying rational self-interest to economics. He then offers a panacea for this complex and deep-rooted problem of elitism, mysticism, corruption, force, fraud, and power lust that he mislabels as capitalism, and that panacea is the ultimate parent-child relationship to be applied to the collective, and it is called communism, and that will bring about equality and happiness and fairness and punch and pie. Now, to jump to the present day for a minute, I think that more and more people are starting to realize the strong division in different schools of thought in economics, especially with the increased popularity of people like Ron Paul and Peter Schiff, and that is between the Keynesians and the Austrian school. Now, this John Maynard Keynes, why so popular? Well, the answer should be obvious. When you have two different schools of economic thought, and one says the state is not helpful, the state is not good, the state is not needed, the state only causes more problems, and one says you need to use the state to fix the problems in a system dominated by state education, who wins? Jump back to the 1800s, to the ideas of Karl Marx. Oh, this idea is awesome. The only question is about implementation. The only debate is about implementation. Marx favors a gradual approach. Like I said, he is a fan of Hegel's dialectic, but not everybody agrees. So now, for that synthesis between philosophy and the psychology of power, this is the behind-the-scenes political conversation that grows out of German idealism and continues right up to the present day.
My guest, Edward Griffin. Mr. Griffin is the author of the book Creature from Jekyll Island, plus many others. So you've been saying to yourself, the government's a mess in one way or another. How do these messes start? Where do they come from? Earlier we've been talking about collectivism. Mr. Griffin gave us some definitions of what that is. And then two tentacles form out and form something equally as ugly throughout history, Leninism and Fabianism. And we're going to find out what these two things were, and are they still around today? Ed Griffin, good to have you with us.
Thank you very much, John.
I think just to kind of back up a little bit, give us another definition of collectivism, then I want to get into Leninism and Fabianism.
Right. These are strange words to our ears in modern times. Collectivism is a word that was used quite freely in books of a few decades ago, but it's a word that's been lost to us today. Roughly defined, it is the concept that government is the solution, the proper solution for most of man's problems. So a collectivist, and this is not a technical definition, but it's a pretty good substitute. A collectivist is a person who believes that if you have a problem and you want to improve society in any way, that the solution should be through government action, through coercion, using laws to bring these things about, and if necessary to sacrifice individuals or minorities, if necessary, for the greater good of society. And you find this philosophy embedded in some of the rather dreaded philosophies or tyrannies of our recent history, like communism and Nazism and fascism, are all based on these principles of sacrificing individuals, if necessary, for the greater good of the greater number. And of course, that always translates into the greater good of the state. The state is presumed